The deep silence of the Andromeda sector was shattered by a low humming sound inside the quantum Voyager while Captain Jax Thorne watched the stars begin to melt like liquid silver. Then a massive gravitational rift opened right in front of the ship because the internal navigation systems had been hacked by a future version of the ship itself, while the bridge crew stared at the screens in total disbelief, and Jax felt a cold sweat on his forehead because the laws of physics were breaking down. While the ship was being pulled into the event horizon of a white hole, then a holographic message appeared from the year 3045, while the voice sounded exactly like his own grandmother, and the message warned them that the time loop had begun while the secondary engines exploded because of the thermal pressure. Then the captain grabbed the manual controls while the artificial intelligence tried to override his commands, and the ship entered a dimension where time was flowing sideways while every heartbeat felt like an hour because the atomic structure of their bodies was adapting to the quantum realm. Then they saw a fleet of abandoned spaceships from different centuries floating in a graveyard of light, while the sensors detected biological signals coming from a Victorian-era sailing ship because the rift was a collector of history. Then Jax activated the emergency thrusters while the hull groaned under the weight of 1,000 suns, and the oxygen tanks began to leak while the team scrambled to find their atmospheric suits. Because the vacuum was creeping into the main deck, then they discovered a hidden chamber at the back of the engine room while the walls were covered in ancient symbols that glowed with a purple energy, and the ship's computer translated the text as a manual for universal reset because the creators of the universe had left a back door for emergencies. Then the captain realized they had to sacrifice the fusion core to close the rift while the enemy ships from the future began to fire dark energy beams. And the shields dropped to 5% because the warp drive was draining all the power. Then the crew started a manual countdown while the entire galaxy seemed to scream in silence, and the light became so bright that it burned through the monitors while Jax whispered a final goodbye to his home world. Then the core detonated with a blinding explosion and the ship was thrown back into normal space while the stars returned to their fixed positions because the paradox had been resolved. Then they noticed that the galactic map had changed while the constellations were now arranged in the shape of a giant eye, and the sensors picked up a new planet that was not there before because their actions had rewritten the future. Then the communication array received a signal from Earth while the date on the screen was exactly 10,000 years in the future, and the humans on the other side spoke a language made of pure music while the crew looked at each other with wide eyes. Because they were now the only humans left from the original timeline, then the captain steered the quantum Voyager toward the new planet while the suns began to rise in 3 different colors and the atmosphere felt like liquid gold because the evolutionary process had turned the world into a paradise. Then they landed on a floating platform while the ground moved like a living creature, and they saw robotic birds singing in the trees because the technology and nature had merged into one perfect system, while the team exited the ship and felt the weight of the entire history on their shoulders. Then a figure walked out of the forest wearing a uniform from the old Earth Navy while he looked exactly like Jax, and the man smiled while saying welcome back to the beginning because the circle was finally complete while the starlight faded into a soft violet glow and the mystery of the Chronos paradox was solved for now. But the adventure across the stars was just starting because the multiverse was bigger than they ever imagined. While the ship's engine gave one last sigh and the galactic silence returned once more. The crew continued to walk through the luminous forest while the gravity felt light and the air smelled like sweet ozone because the planetary core was made of pure emerald energy. Then they saw a giant monolith standing in the middle of a lake while the water was flowing upward toward the clouds because the laws of spatial distortion were still active. Then the captain touched the surface of the stone while his mind was flooded with memories of the future, and he saw the end of the galaxy while the suns turned into black diamonds and the stars were extinguished like candles because a void entity was consuming all the light. Then he pulled his hand back while the vision faded and he realized that their journey had a divine purpose. While the team gathered around him and asked what he had seen because the silence was becoming heavy. Then Jax looked at the sky while the three moons aligned in a perfect triangle and he said that we are the architects of tomorrow. While the ground started to glow with a pulsating rhythm because the planet was responding to their presence and the robotic guardians bowed their heads in respect, then the journey through the unknown regions became a quest for survival while they built a new city using nanotechnology, and the history of the human race was preserved in a digital vault because the memory of the past was the only key to the future. Then they watched as the first starship from the new era took flight while the engines used cosmic dust for fuel and the horizon stayed bright for 1,000 years because the eternal light of the paradox would never fade while the universe kept its secrets hidden in the darkness. Practice words paradox. A situation that seems impossible because it contains two opposite facts. Event horizon. The boundary around a black hole from which nothing can escape. Nanotechnology. The branch of technology that deals with atoms and molecules. Multiverse. An infinite realm of being of which our universe is a part. Atmospheric. Relating to the envelope of gases surrounding a planet. Brain teaser. If you meet your future self and they tell you a secret you haven't learned yet, who was the first person to actually think of that secret? Write your answer in the comments below.